The Denver Broncos did not make a move at the NFL trade deadline, as Sean Payton says they're moving forward with the team that they have. Was it the right move? We'll discuss here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, welcome into another episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, where you know it's your team every day. Thank you to all the everydayers out there. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. We've got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show as the Broncos decide not to make a move at the NFL trade deadline. We'll go through why the Broncos decided to stand pat at the deadline and what they view of their team going forward. On top of that, we'll go through Marvin Mims returning to practice as the Broncos are a little banged up on the injury report ahead of Thursday Night Football. We'll take you inside the locker room here today. You'll hear from several players. Plus, how are the Broncos approaching the short week against the Raiders? We'll go through all of that on today's episode of the show, brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app here. A lot to break down here today. Broncos Country, as we have just one more day before the Broncos host the Las Vegas Raiders on Thursday Night Football. Primetime matchup where they're going to be wearing the throwbacks. And a win for this Broncos team would put them at 8-2. But let's go to the NFL trade deadline. That was the biggest topic of discussion around the NFL on Tuesday, and Denver ultimately decided not to make a move. And I think that there's a mixed reaction here, obviously, amongst the fan base. I understand that Broncos fans wanted the team to go out there and make a move. There were rumblings about them being interested in wide receivers across the NFL, potentially Rashid Shaheed, who ends up with the Seattle Seahawks. There were some rumblings late on Tuesday about the Broncos having some interest in Jalen Waddle, but the Broncos ultimately decide not to make a move there. And if it were around the standpoint of Jalen Waddle maybe coming to Denver, he would have certainly made this offense better in a handful of different ways. We talk about all year long, Courtland Sutton seeing press coverage from obviously the best corner that the opposing team has and a safety over the top and inside. Their bracket covering Courtland Sutton quite a bit, especially on key passing down situations. And you want a guy like a Jalen Waddle. I mean, certainly if he were added into the mix to this team, Jalen Waddle could have taken maybe that pressure away because of what he can do in the short to intermediate underneath. Certainly he brings that value to the table, but the Broncos believe right now with where they're at, the asking price, I think if they were truly in and having conversations about maybe being interested in Waddle, I think Miami's asking price ultimately too high. I don't think the Broncos wanted to part ways with the first-round pick to acquire Jalen Waddle. And I think if we look at the history of Sean Payton, folks, it's not that often that Sean Payton pays wide receivers. The Broncos went out and they paid Courtland Sutton, but he's not going to really go out there. I don't think historically we've seen him go out and pay for a handful of different wide receivers. Look, you got Marvin Mims, who's on an expiring contract at some point. You got Pat Bryant and Troy Franklin right now. They're on rookie deals, and they like these guys. They like Marvin Mims. They like the top four wide receivers that they have on this roster with where they're at, and certainly there's still some developing with these guys. Let's not mistake that. I think you add another wide receiver, it would have been great. It would have made the offense better. Would have given Bo Nix another option to throw to here. But I understand why the Broncos didn't do that. I think it's valid for the fan base to be frustrated, but ultimately I was at the building. I was at the Broncos facility on Tuesdays. We watched practice, and the vibe inside the building was that they like the unit that they certainly have. And I know Broncos fans can make the argument, well, the offense has struggled through three quarters consistently this season. They haven't pieced together a full game. They could have used another playmaking tight end. They could have used another playmaking wide receiver. I think that there are valid arguments to that. I'm not trying to discredit that in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just telling you from how Sean Payton is, the only way he would have made a move is if the price was right for a specific player. Sean Payton, historically, dating back to when he was the head coach in New Orleans in 2006, has never traded for a wide receiver at the NFL trade deadline. The Broncos like where they're at 7-2. They like the guys that they have on the roster at wide receiver. If anything, they could add in free agency. Cody, what does that do for us right now? It does nothing, Broncos country. I understand it, that you have to wait to free agency for the Broncos to go out there and make a move next to add to this roster. I understand that's what Broncos fans wanted, but that's just the way the team viewed it and certainly approached it. Tight end is a little bit of a trickier market. I'm sure the Denver was monitoring it. but they want to try to get Evan Engram more involved. Adam Troutman is a reliable, consistent blocking guy. Is that enough right now for the Broncos to have better production at tight end? You can make an argument that no, that has not been the case, but they're staying the course right now. I understand it. I know where the team is coming from, and I also understand the fan perspective of it, of, hey, you're in a window right now. Why not go out there and make a move? I don't disagree, but that's not what the Broncos ultimately decided to do. Caught up with Broncos outside linebacker Nik Bonitto following practice inside the locker room, and he was asked a simple question about the trade deadline. Obviously, the team deciding not to make a move or a decision. His thoughts on the Broncos standing pat here at the NFL trade deadline.
Yeah, I mean, just shows the confidence that we have in the team that we have now. Obviously, we're off to a really good start, and obviously we're doing something right. So they just have trust in us, so we just got to keep going.
And look, George Paton, Sean Payton, they have trust in the roster that they have put together. Their philosophy and George's philosophy, Sean's philosophy is to draft and develop players. While you're in this window right now at 7-2, I understand the pressing need to say, hey, we're in this window. You got Bo Nix on a rookie contract. Go out there and add another playmaker here, right? Push the chips all in. I get it. I get it 110%. I think that there are valid arguments there. My argument that I had last week, certainly when talking about it, was that, okay, hey, the Broncos offense, we've seen it as is. They've struggled enough with the consistency factor of getting everybody involved. Are there better players out there right now that would make the Broncos offense better that they maybe could have traded for? 110%. I think Jalen Waddle is an instant upgrade to this Broncos offense if you were to add him into the mix. But certainly, the Broncos have to feel that way. The Broncos have to feel like if they were interested in that, it's the right player, it's the right move, and it's also the right price, which ultimately the vibe coming out of Miami, the price, I think, for a guy like Jalen Waddle was a little bit too high at this time. And so the Broncos not making a move here, but probably going to make a move. I think we're going to see a very aggressive team here in free agency, but the Broncos loving their in-house stance on drafting and developing players. Is it the popular thing? No, not necessarily, but I certainly understand that here. Talking to players, they and even in the locker room, the one thing that I would say is that they like their team. And certainly, I'm sure there are guys out there. Look, Pat Surtain and Jalen Waddle, they are close. They're tight like this. I imagine there would have been some excitement. There might have been some conversations there from Pat saying, hey, let's go get Jalen. Let's bring him here to the Mile High City. But ultimately, you have to also factor in where the Broncos are at from a salary cap standpoint. I believe they right now have $4.6 million in space, so there would have had to been some flexing, some shuffling to make that work. Those numbers can obviously always be manipulated. Those guys, you can find ways, but when you're on a time crunch, and as we understand with how the NFL trade deadline works, sometimes you're in a race against the clock, and if you don't have the framework for certain things, that could be challenging here. But the Broncos believe that their unit that they have is still growing and developing, and they can make some noise there. Here they are, and they haven't played their best yet, Broncos country. Here they are at 7-2 with the chance to go 8-2. They haven't played their best football yet. Bo Nix told us on the podium on Tuesday that they're trying to piece together. They're always just focused on the next game here. The next one obviously is against the Raiders. They're not happy with how the offense is performing. Bo Nix is not happy with how things have been going, and they want to get to a point where it's right. Yes, a new player could certainly add to the mix, but that new player would also have to have learned the playbook as well. So Denver's just going to go forth with what they have in terms of playmakers, and that obviously means that, okay, hey, you mentioned Marvin Mims in that conversation. Well, Broncos country. Marvin was back at practice on Tuesday here, could end up playing here on Thursday Night Football. We'll highlight the injury report as the Broncos are getting some guys back healthy, short week turnaround, but the injury report does contain an extensive list. Is there any reason to be concerned? We'll go through that and more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. The NBA season is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or if you want to ride the hot hand as the game is going about, FanDuel, they have live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. And on top of that, they're here for the NFL season as well as the Denver Broncos are home favorites against the Las Vegas Raiders. So if you sign up as a new customer and place $5 on the Broncos money line, they win on Thursday Night Football, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So right now, FanDuel, they are giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over there at Duer, and I love the pair of Duer jeans that I have. I have their Performance Denim Slim straight jeans, and they're the most comfortable pair of jeans that I own. I wear them on game days. When the Broncos play, I'm going to wear mine on Thursday Night Football. Duer jeans, they have 5 times the stretch of traditional denim. They're antibacterial, which means that your jeans, they stay fresher for longer, so you can wear them more and wash them less. Plus, they have Cool Max technology that regulates your body temperature and it wicks moisture. It keeps you cool and comfortable as the temperatures change. And Duer jeans, they feel stretchy without looking stretchy. Duer combines classic jeans wear style with the kind of comfort and performance that you get from athletic wear, so you get the best of both worlds. Duer pioneers a blending technical innovation with everyday clothing, and they invented the original performance denim. Simply put, Duer makes the world's most comfortable pants without having to sacrifice style. And you can check out Duer in store here in Denver. It's at 2621 Larimer Street. Pick up a pair for yourself or as an amazing holiday gift and mention my promo code LOCKEDONDenver in store to get 15% off your first order, or check them out online at shopduer.com/LockedOnDenver for 15% off. That's shopduer.com/LockedOnDenver. Marvin Mims was back at practice for the Broncos on Tuesday. Short-week turnaround puts them in the spotlight here against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Broncos pretty banged up right now on the injury report, with guys dealing with little bumps and bruises, whereas the Las Vegas Raiders look pretty healthy coming into this matchup here. Something's got to give. We'll go through the Broncos injury report, and we'll hear how players are taking care of their bodies so far this week on a short week turnaround, where really that has been the conversation for this team. Real quick, want to say thank you so much, Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you missed it, yesterday we debuted the brand new Broncos Squad Show here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where you're going to get myself, you're going to get Sayre Bedinger, Anilo Piero, who does the postcast after games, and Nick Ferguson. You're going to get us on Tuesdays here on the Locked On Broncos podcast feed. And on top of that, you're going to get us on post games as well. After the game ends, you'll get all of us in a Broncos Squad Show here on the Locked On Network. Very excited about that, so make sure you go check out yesterday's episode. Show it some love, and we'll get you on Thursday Night Football as well after the Broncos game here. But let's go through the Broncos injury report here as we get ready for Thursday Night Football. And if you looked on Monday, the Broncos initially released an estimation as if they were to practice on Monday. This is what the injury report would have looked like. These are the names on that list. You had Jonathan Cooper, John Franklin Myers, DJ Jones, Brandon Jones, PJ Locke, Marvin Mims, Riley Moss, Nate Adkins, Will Lutz, Pat Surtain. We know with Pat Surtain, obviously, and Nate Adkins, those guys did not land on IR, but they're not going to play in the next handful of weeks here. Riley Moss popped up as an estimated DNP on Monday, but he was back at practice on Tuesday and was limited alongside safety Brandon Jones. It's good to get those guys back in the mix here. JFM, Cooper, and DJ Jones, those guys were full participants in Tuesday's practice. And obviously, Brandon Jones, PJ Locke, Marvin, and Riley, they were all limited participants, and I think the expectation is all those guys are going to go. But let's go to the biggest story here in terms of what the Broncos have been missing. Marvin Mims certainly was missed, I'd say, in Sunday's game against the Houston Texans. You talk about the muff punt by, obviously, Michael Bandy. I thought Bandy did a pretty good job filling in on offense. He had that nice catch and run out in the flat to get upfield for a first down. But I just think that the dynamic when Marvin is not back there returning punts or returning kicks, it stinks a little bit. It doesn't have the same flash or the allure that we're used to. And I think so many people, I'm just speaking for myself, and I'm sure Broncos Country can also speak for it as well. Make sure you drop it in the comments. I just felt a little uneasy with somebody else back there that's not Marvin Mims returning punts, right? And ultimately, I think most of the time, Michael Bandy did a good job. But you talk about the muff punt, it's recovered, leads to points before halftime for the Houston Texans. Can't have that happen. That's just too problematic here for where this Broncos team is at. But I think when you talk about the injuries, Denver is a little banged up coming into this game. Jonathan Cooper, when we watched him at practice on Tuesday, he had a pretty sizable cast around his thumb or his wrist. So I'm not sure if the stability thing, Cooper obviously tapes things up, I'd say on game day. So I'm not sure if this is new or if this is just something that he's obviously battling right now when he's got that thumb injury. But once again, definitely something worth monitoring. I don't think it's going to impact him in any way, shape, or form. But Marvin Mims returning on Tuesday is a good sign here. The key we're not going to be able to see Wednesday's practice, but the Broncos, they're going to have another walkthrough before Thursday's game. We'll find out in the final injury report that comes out here today whether or not Marvin is cleared and ready to roll. And we may not even find that out really up until kickoff. But I would say the fact that he's back on the field is a good sign here for the Broncos as they prepare for the Las Vegas Raiders. You're going to need Marvin when it comes to that special team side of things. I'm excited about it. But I also think another thing you take a look at is when you have these injuries and it's Thursday night football, it's a short turnaround. We talked to players in the locker room, and the number one thing that they said this week, we could talk so much about game plan and scheme, how you're going to attack the Raiders defense, how you're going to attack Geno Smith and the Raiders offense. The idea and the theme this week is we really have to focus and hone in on fundamentals this week. Fundamentals and just the basics, the structure, the foundation of our offense and our defense are going to be very important this week because you don't necessarily get a lot of time on the field to go full speed, to see the looks that you're going to get from the Raiders on Thursday. That's just the reality of Thursday night football and the short turnarounds. It's hard. It's hard for the bodies. So the emphasis all week long is fundamentals, but it's also player recovery. It is that recovery factor and treatment. The Broncos, really after Sunday's game, the Broncos began those treatment stations on the plane, in the stadium before they even boarded the bus to go to the airport to get on the plane. They came in, obviously, on Monday for treatment and recovery. Tuesday, obviously, they continued that on top of their practice routine, and following practice, treatment and recovery was at the number one priority here for all these players because you talk to most of these guys here, and they'll tell you, our body doesn't really feel kind of back to normal until really that Thursday. So right when you're about to go in and play a game, your body starts to feel like, okay, now we're getting back to a point where we feel comfortable, we feel good. And so if you're already dealing with some ailments and some injuries along the way, you really have to take a deeper investment into that recovery process. And certainly that's been the case here for the Broncos all throughout the entire week here for them. Thursday night football, we know that matchup is looming closely here. If you look at the Las Vegas Raiders injury report, we'll have a chance to catch up with your boy Q, host of the Locked On Raiders podcast tomorrow for a crossover show here. But for them, they don't have a lot of guys on the injury report. Thomas Booker, a defensive tackle, full participant with an oblique injury. Brock Bowers, a toe injury, full participant all week. So no limitations there. Johnson, a fibula, a leg injury for him. He's been a full go all week as well. Nothing really concerning on the Raiders injury report, but they also have to play as well. They don't have as much time to prepare for Thursday's game, than Denver. They got the same amount of time considering when those two guys, when those teams played. And they obviously went deep into overtime a little bit. It almost ended in a tie with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the argument is that the Broncos had a little bit more rest and a little bit of ease coming into this matchup, but they got to take care of business. It's going to be crucial for them to come into this game and obviously execute the basic stuff. That's one thing that Bo Nix told us at the podium on Tuesday was we have to go to our fundamentals. We have to start getting these little things right offensively. And I agree. And I think the consistency factor of opening things up is, hey, come out here and get the run game going here with J.K. Dobbins, with R.J. Harvey. Get the quick passing game going. I think that's going to be very important, especially if you're trying to neutralize the threat that is Tyree Wilson and also Max Crosby. They got some really good players on the defensive side of the ball in Vegas, even though that they're a bad football team. You can't overlook them, especially in AFC West divisional game. Certainly, the Broncos aren't overlooking the Raiders as well. You'll hear from Nik Bonitto on Ashton Jeanty. We'll hear from Mike McGlinchey, and we'll hear from Evan Engram and Quinn Miners on how they're approaching the entire week here. You'll get that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Built, and nobody likes paying rent. I can't stand paying rent, but you know what? I have to. But if you must, you might as well get something for it, and that's where Built comes in handy, because Built is changing the game by turning your rent payment into real rewards that you can use to reward yourself there. And when you pay rent through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed toward hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But Built isn't just about rent. It's about around your entire neighborhood. Whether I'm grabbing food at my local restaurants or heading to the gym, I'm still earning rewards. Built has made everyday life feel more rewarding, from your neighborhood to your travel plans. My wife, she loves to travel. She loves a vacation. She loves a suitcase. And we use Built so we can pay for our next vacation with our points. So turn your rent into rewards and start earning points around your neighborhood by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnfl. And make sure to use the link so that they know that we sent you. How are the Denver Broncos approaching their preparation this week against the Las Vegas Raiders in their first matchup of the season? There's a lot of familiarity here between these two teams, but the Raiders are a little bit different than the team that the Broncos faced last year. New places, new faces, new coaches, you name it. The Broncos, they still have a tough task on hand in an AFC West divisional matchup. Can they take care of business? That is the question going into Thursday night here. We'll hear from players inside the locker room here on how they're approaching the week and also the makeup of the team. I think very, very important. But more importantly, let's kick things off by talking about the Broncos defense against Ashton Jeanty and this Las Vegas Raiders offense. I think the number one thing you have to look at here with this Raiders offense led by Geno Smith, who's coming off of obviously a 4-touchdown performance against the Jaguars, threw an interception. Geno has thrown a lot of picks this season for the Raiders. He was efficient last week. What version of Geno are the Broncos going to be facing? I think so much of what opens things up for him, at least just what I've seen from watching the Raiders, is when there's balance in the passing game. The big story, obviously, of the week, there is going to be no Jacoby Myers in this game here for the Raiders. He was their top receiver. He was traded away to the Jacksonville Jaguars, ironically, after the two teams just played each other there. So you're going to see a lot of Brock Bowers, probably as that primary guy. They have Trey Tucker. Now they have also Tyler Lockett, who the Broncos faced off against in week 1 when he was a member of the Tennessee Titans. But you have to worry about Ashton Jeanty, obviously a physical guy who can run through contact. He's a hard guy to bring down. And he's also a guy that is involved out of the backfield as a pass catcher. We caught up a Broncos outside linebacker, Nik Bonitto, who talked about Ashton Jeanty.
Good back. I mean, especially, after contact, he's still able to shrug guys off of him, get guys off of him, shake them and whatever. So, he's a really good back for sure.
And it's going to be a test here for the Broncos this week. I think they've done really good so far this season against some of the better backs that they have faced. I felt like last week against the Houston Texans, that duo of obviously Woody Marks and Nick Chubb, I felt like was going to be a challenge, at least on paper, considering what we saw them do to the 49ers the week prior to that. But Denver's defense, led by Dre Greenlaw, they were up for the task there. And I imagine they're going to have a good plan in place here for Ashton Jeanty. One thing we are seeing with this team, though, there's a resilience factor to them. They're finding ways, even though they're not playing the prettiest, especially on the offensive side of the ball. One thing that Mike McGlinchey talked about, and he highlighted what he believes is a strength of this team, is that they have really high character and that, they're going to do things the right way. They're going to approach games the right way. And more importantly, as they continue to battle to get to a spot where they're proud of the offense, he says that's one thing that they're proud of in terms of their team. Here's what Mike McGlinchey had to say.
I think it says a lot about our team. I think we're strong in character. I think we're strong in football character. And I think we have people that rise to the occasion at all times. And it's a huge quality to have, and we got to keep it going.
This week, you have to rise to the occasion against the Raiders because the narrative here is, hey, the Broncos are sitting there at 7-2. The Raiders are at 2-6. The Raiders are done on the year. The Raiders are a threat to still poke some holes in some teams' hopes and dreams. And look, you got the Los Angeles Chargers. When we did our State of the AFC West early on this week, you got the Chargers, who are right behind Denver, just creeping and waiting for them to make a mistake. And obviously we know that they face the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, and everybody should be rooting for Pittsburgh in that regard. But you can't overlook a team like the Raiders. And I think that's something that Broncos fans, and certainly I think you talk to national media pundits, they're worried about, okay, hey, are the Broncos looking ahead to that Kansas City Chiefs game? Going around in the locker room and talking to guys, I can tell you this, they're focused on the Raiders. They're not worried about the Chiefs game. They're focused on the game that they can control, which is right now. And that's just a great mindset to have because I feel like some old Broncos teams of the past, and look, we've covered some really bad Broncos teams, folks, in years past, where even if the Broncos, when they were bad, were facing a team who was worse than them, they would overlook that team and they would play down to the competition. Now, I think there's been an argument at times this year, this Broncos team is, whether it's offensively, defensively at times, they have played down to the level of competition there. You can't do that. And I think that this team, as you get deeper in the season, we are here in week 10, they're not overlooking anybody. They're not overlooking the Raiders just because of their record. They understand, even though that the Raiders were trying to, they traded away a couple of their players. There were teams obviously interested in trying to get Max Crosby, but the Raiders weren't going to budge on that. They know that this Raiders team, and it's an AFC West divisional game, they know how important this game is. And one thing that Bo Nix said at the podium on Tuesday to us is these games are important. They're like conference games at college. You have to win these because these are the games that are going to get you into the postseason. You talk about conference record, you talk about divisional record. These things matter more than everything. And these players inside that locker room, they understand that. They know that. I think that's a big thing too. And one thing I think fans are talking about all week long is the Broncos offense can't find themselves in a hole where they're playing down early on. Nik Bonitto was asked about that, is whether or not, when the defense is playing really well, if the offense gets into the hole, what does the defense think of that? Here's Bonitto's response.
Nah, I mean, shoot, I don't really have a problem with it. I mean, our job is to just keep getting stops. We've seen it time and time again. When it comes to the fourth quarter and, the offense has opportunities to make plays, they go do it, and they make all the plays that need to be. So, I mean, as long as we keep winning, I ain't tripping.
And the defense, they feed off of that. You talk to guys like Nik Bonitto, you talk to Jonathan Cooper, they know that they're going to make plays and get stops. And they know that ultimately the offense is going to reward them. Now, I think everybody in that locker room, Mike McGlinchey even said it, Bo Nix said it, we would love to get the ball and just score and be able to just reward our defense. They want to get to that point. And there's some frustration, I would say, by the offense. Players have been very vocal about it. They're not afraid to shy away from talking about it. They want to be better. They're not happy with the standard. They're not accepting as to how they've been playing overall as a unit. And they believe that they got to start buckling down because, look, you're at this crucial juncture here in week 10. You have a matchup next week against Kansas City, the bye week. Then you come out for the second half stretch of your schedule. You have to take care of business because that's what's going to get you into the playoffs. Right now, Denver's got a good record, but it's not about how you start. It's about how you finish. And you want to see this Broncos team finish things on a strong note. We talked so much this week about the short turnaround. Broncos tight end Evan Engram talked about it as a veteran guy in terms of how he approaches the week on these Thursday night games and how important it is to really just focus on the little things. Here's what we caught up with Evan Engram on inside the Broncos locker room on Tuesday.
I think it's best to just kind of the fundamentals of our positions, of the offense, of our team, just the fundamentals of football. Like on a short week, you don't really get a lot of time on the field to get those full speed reps or the clean reps of ironing out details, kind of things that you know best, the small details that you've done your whole life playing this game, and try to put together a good game plan for a short turnaround.
And I think the number one thing, too, is, as I mentioned earlier, you don't get a chance to go in and say, okay, hey, this is it. This is the Raiders offense. This is the defense. We're going to go through, and this is what they've started to do the last couple of weeks. You don't get to really dive fully into the on-field full game prep on installing your game plan there. A lot of this week is fundamentally focused. It's going back to this is our foundation of the offense. This is what we do well. Defensively, this is what we do well. And you kind of lean on that a little bit in these Thursday night matchups. And the good news is after this, the Broncos, they're going to have 10 days to prepare for the Kansas City Chiefs after Thursday night football. And you don't want a sour taste in your mouth after Thursday night if you lose and you have a letdown game at home on a night where you're wearing the throwbacks, let alone against the Las Vegas Raiders. You want to go into that 10-day stretch of being able to prepare for Kansas City saying, hey, we're going to get rested up. We're going to get healthy. And we know it's going to be a dogfight, but the Broncos have a great opportunity in front of them. And the only way that they can suffer a little bit of a letdown is if they do that themselves. They understand what's at stake. Will they rise to the occasion and be able to do that and obviously come up with a big-time victory on Thursday Night Football? Broncos Country, that is the hope, is that they can do that. Will they? Remains to be seen. We'll have you covered all week long here on the Locked On Broncos podcast, not only with today's show, but tomorrow you're going to get crossover Thursdays. I sit down with your boy Q, host of Locked On Raiders. We talk about the key matchups to this game, the key storylines for each team this week, and ultimately what each team needs to do to come out on top. You'll get that on tomorrow's episode of the show. Plus, you're also going to get a Broncos squad show following the Broncos Raiders Thursday night game. You'll get all that here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We know it's your team every day. Broncos Country, lock in. We'll see you next time.